Hi everyone, welcome to the MrpTech podcast. This is episode 174. My name is Matt, and thanks again for joining us this week on the podcast. This week I'm trying something a little bit different, and you won't notice it on the audio feed, hopefully, but I am providing a sort of experimental video feed here on the YouTube channel, and something I've wanted to do for a while. I'm just trying something a little bit different here today, and maybe I'll continue it in the future. We'll see how today goes and kind of go from there. Normally the podcast is an audio only. Today we have like a supplemental video that I'm going to produce with it and see how it goes. So I've talked a lot lately on the podcast about iPad Pros recently. What the last week's episode was basically guessing on what the next model of iPad Pro will bring to the table. And today I kind of want to talk a lot about productivity on tablets and my struggle with tablets going way back to when tablets first came out. So the first tablet that I had years ago was an Android tablet. It was a Toshiba Thrive, and I brought this up on the podcast before, and it was sort of my introduction to tablets. Now, if you have ever owned a Toshiba Thrive, this thing was massive. It was big and bulky. What was great about it is the back panel was completely removable. It was customizable. And you could very easily replace the battery if you wanted to do that. And so there was lots of options with it that I found interesting. It had SD card slot on it for expanded storage. And right away, the problems that I came into with this was not that it was underpowered, but it was running Android 3.1 at the time, and updates to the Android operating system were few and far between. I had the tablet for over a year, and it was way behind everything else at the time. The cameras on it weren't great. The speakers weren't really all that great, but it did have the HDMI port that was very useful, and the non-slip grip on it was definitely something that got me interested in tablets. The problem was there wasn't really a whole lot of really great apps that ran well on it, in my opinion. So eventually, I ended up selling the tablet, and I picked up the Samsung Galaxy Note 8. And this was a sort of spur-of-the-moment purchase. I went into a Staples, and they had crazy sales going on. This was, I believe, normally a $350 tablet, and it was on sale close to $250 or something like that, and a really great sale that sort of wasn't advertised online. It was just sort of an in-store meant to get you to impulse buy, so to speak. And I was in the market for a new tablet, and I thought, this 8-inch screen is big enough for what I didn't want a huge screen, and it had 16 gigs of memory in it, 2 gigs of RAM, which was an improvement from the Thrive, and it came in the black and the white version. I believe I had the white version of this, and got a nice case for it, a little prop-up case for it. We got a huge micro SD card, and really wanted to back up have lots of storage in it, and had the most modern, up-to-date version of Android on it, and came with the stylus that I really didn't use a whole lot, but it was certainly handy to have a stylus at the time. Didn't work all that great, but it was definitely a step in the right direction. So when I purchased this was right around the time where I started, I not sure if I had a smartphone at the time or was interested in a smartphone, but I would carry this around everywhere I went because it was my media consumption device for podcasts. So I watched a lot of video podcasts at the time, and the 8-inch form factor was really great. If I was sitting in a car waiting, or if I was sort of at work on lunch or something like that, I could easily pop open this and plug it into a stereo or the aux port on my car or something like that, and be listening to my podcasts along the way. Samsung had all of their own apps, they called the S apps, I believe, at the time. I didn't really use a whole lot of them. This tablet introduced me to BeyondPod, which is the Android podcasting app of choice that I always loved back in the day. It allowed me to back up all the podcasts, download all the podcasts onto that external SD card, and it didn't use any of my internal storage. So it was kind of great because I had hundreds of podcasts that I listened to, and I could keep them until I was ready to listen to, and it didn't really affect me because I had the larger SD card. Right around this time is when Android really switched up what you could put on an SD card and what you had to keep internal storage. And ultimately, again, I sort of struggled with what to do with it other than having it be a media consumption device. And it was sort of very limited in what I really wanted to do with it. So I sort of passed on it again, and I ended up selling it on eBay. And one of the major reasons why I sold it is because at the time I was just purchasing sound equipment for my band, and I really wanted a tablet that could run my sound system remotely. And so I ended up trading it, and I sold it on eBay, and I purchased my first iPad mini. Now, the iPad mini was sort of the same form factor. It's not exactly the same, but it's a smaller screen, same spec, 16 gigs. I had to sacrifice a whole lot with no external storage, with the SD card, and I found out real quick that 16 gigs wasn't a whole lot. This is when I had to transfer to Downcast for podcasts. And Downcast was not necessarily my favorite podcasting app right away. The biggest drawback with it was with BeyondPod is I could set it automatically to download my podcast like at 6 a.m. I would get up and be on my way for school, and I'd have all my podcasts downloaded and ready to play. You can't do that with iPads. So it was a big change, and there was some other give and take as well with the iPad mini, but it did all of the music things that I needed to do, which was run the sound system remotely. Again, I seem to have always struggled with tablets and what to do besides just one or two very specific things, other than being a media consumption device. And ultimately, I ended up upgrading the iPad because I was on an older version of the iPad mini. I ended up upgrading to iPad mini 2, which I had for years. And I really enjoyed it until it was basically no longer supported. Things started running very slowly on it. And eventually I upgraded to the 9.7 iPad Pro. And that's when I started to see some real differences in what you could do with tablets. And it has been sort of an ongoing thing with me that I've always wanted to have an Android device. And a few years ago, I talked about on the podcast that I around Christmas time was able to pick up a Amazon Fire HD 8. And it was $39 or something like that, and I wasn't expecting anything super great. Actually, this may have been more expensive. It may have been the $79 range. Slightly more advanced than the 7. I believe that was the price. And looking on the screen, it's $79.99 at Amazon back then. And I was happy that I had something running some version of Android for a while, and I experimented with F-Droid, downloading apps, and the Kindle version of Android just wasn't the same for me. It wasn't really something that I got into. Playing games on it was often hit or miss. You could put the Google Play Store on it. Only certain apps would work. And it would be great for kids to use. But again, the tablet thing just seemed to miss the mark with me. And I ended up, I sold this on Facebook, I think. I don't remember, for $25 or something like that I sold it for. And it made somebody pretty happy that they were able to pick one up because theirs had broken. And so I was happy to pass it along because I didn't really have a use for it. And that's sort of the thing that I've struggled with for a while is, other than consuming media, what are tablets good for? And I've mentioned a lot recently that I'm working on this huge project, and for very specific things, the iPads are great. Any tablet, I should say, is great for doing a specific task. And it really came down to, if I'm using this for a business, I have specific needs that iPads are great for. In my case, it's PDF reading music scores, and boy, they do a great job of that. But if I'm using a tablet in a personal life, what are some things that I can do to sort of increase productivity? And I've done this search on Google many times. What am I getting wrong with tablets, and why am I not able to do the things that I can do on a laptop on an iPad? And so the idea, I've searched this, and the results are almost laughable at certain points. For iPad, turn on Siri so you can use your voice settings, or use drag and drop for moving mobile items around your iPad. Things like long pressing on the apps and getting more features. I mean, these are really simple things that don't really make your iPad more productive. And even things like using the slide over feature, where you can have two apps open side by side on the Apple iPad Pros. Unless you have a bigger screen, yes, that's handy for certain things, but I'm still struggling to find those productive things. Now, one of the things that I found shocking, actually, was that for that iPad Pro 9.7 inch, I bought a Zag keyboard, and I wasn't expecting to use it very much. And I will say that when you purchase a keyboard to go along with a tablet, it really will make a night and day difference to be able to type much quicker than you can by just tapping on the screen, at least in my perspective. So that's one thing that I have found that makes a tablet such as an iPad much more work-friendly, much more user-friendly, and a lot of tablets, even Android tablets, you can either connect a mouse or have a Bluetooth mouse, and you'll have a pointer on the screen. I'm not sure I really like the way Apple's setup for using a Bluetooth mouse works. It's not like a traditional desktop with a mouse. It's there are some things you can do and some things you can't. So, but buying a keyboard definitely will help. And now when I bought the Zag keyboard for my iPad 9.7, I found myself looking for a touchpad, and It didn't exist. So I often would find myself pushing on the keyboard, trying to find where my trackpad would be, and then realizing, oh, you idiot, you're on your iPad. There's no touchpad for iPad. So there's all of these different things that are sort of setting you up to be more productive. And I think just about all of them fall flat. And whether it's cloud storage, using Google Drive or iCloud, using your email, and I'll tell you why in just a second. The idea here is you should be able to do everything by now on an iPad or tablet that you can do on a laptop. And to some extent you can, but you're very limited. I'll give you an example of Gmail. The Gmail app on iPad is pretty good. You can switch between different Gmail accounts. I have several different things that I'm always working on, and I'm using different Gmail accounts. I can switch back and forth very easily. The problem is that there's no integration with any of your settings in your contacts. So for instance, in my contacts, I have groups of people that I email all the time. I don't have access to any of those. So I can't type in group one and try to send an email to group one. I have to type in their addresses all specifically. Now, it doesn't make a difference if it's like 3 or 4 people you're emailing, but if it's 20, then typing in 20 different emails and making sure you don't forget somebody, that's just not okay with me. So on a laptop, I can log into Gmail, I can type in group one, and I know that it's getting there. Cloud storage, we're limited on space. I just abandoned Dropbox. I was paying $12 a month for Dropbox storage. Google Cloud, you have a limited amount there. iCloud, you have a limited amount of storage there. For most people, it's probably going to be okay, but I found any cloud solution that you're using on iPad, it's very slow to load, and it's just not user friendly for me for anything that I'm doing. A lot of times when I'm trying to import music from, say, Dropbox into a Fourscore app to read these PDFs, Dropbox will fail to download the PDF, and then it's fighting for 40 minutes trying to get a file to import into the app. So these are simple things that I'm making a big deal about, because I often struggle with this with tablets. I have found that with the larger screen, and just taking a step back, it's not just tablets that I have this problem with. I have the same issue with Chromebooks. A very limited number of apps that are well designed, that are easy to use, that work well, and that are fast. And Chromebooks are, especially when you're working in a school district, Chromebooks are seriously underpowered, and they're great for very basic things, working on Google Docs, uploading files to Google Drive, anything Google related, Gmail. Sure, they're going to work great. Are they going to work as well as a Pro line model of something? No. And the thing that I have always fought is you basically pay for what you get. And when I've bought something cheap, I have usually paid twice, because I've usually had to buy something again that will work better. And which is why I sold my Chromebook. When I used to have a Chromebook, I bought it specifically to fool around and see if I could get Linux working on it, which I did. After I succeeded with it, it worked well. I would constantly lose network connection, and so eventually I did the crouton thing where you could switch back and forth between Chrome OS and Ubuntu, and that was kind of fun for a day or two, and realized that everything was very slow and bogged down. And anytime that I was using the network, after an update, the network would lose out. So eventually I went back to Chrome OS and realized I don't really like Chrome OS. And so then I sold the Chromebook. So these smaller screen devices that are underpowered have always been an issue for me. And up until recently, I've had this issue, and things have slowly been getting better over the years. And there are apps where you have to pay now for these types of full-on features. And there's things like Yoink and all these other apps that Microsoft Office, where you're paying $7 a month for something like that. The prices for apps are now going up. I was trying to recommend an app for somebody the other day. When I bought the app, it was like $3.99, $4.99, something like that. Now the app is $14. The prices are just getting outrageous for certain things. But I have found, and I'm sure I'm kind of complaining a little bit, but I have found that with the lower powered tablets, you're not going to get as far, like Kindle Fire. I'll tell you what's great about that Kindle Fire. Going back to the Kindle Fire now, just for a second. What was great about this, my favorite part of the Kindle Fire, was that because it's owned by Amazon, you in one of the menus in the Fire OS had a specific spot for audiobooks. So it pulled in all of my stuff from Audible, which is also owned by Amazon. So it would have been a great audiobook reader. Now, the idea behind that, though, is I already had an audiobook player. I used my iPhone when I'm in the car. So the Fire really wasn't something that I really wanted to use as an audiobook player, but it was a good feature. So a very low-powered device that could do something useful. Again, it's media consumption, though. So what are we going to do besides media consumption? Now, the Pro models I have found are definitely coming a long way. And one of the things that I really enjoy about iPad is the battery life. It's just incredible. I was talking about this grant that I've been working on, and the iPads, I think I bought one maybe a few weeks ago, and I've charged it maybe a month now. It's been a month. I think I've charged it one time. I've used it off and on, and it's got, I say, a 10-hour battery life. And I'm sure Samsung and Android devices have come a long way since I started using them back in the day. And so this isn't an Android versus iOS statement at all, but the Pro line Apple iPads have really great battery life. And something that I've seen makes them more usable. Not only the keyboards, but just having a slightly bigger screen for me seems to make me want to use it a little bit more, and I can do more things. The iPad Pro 12.9 inch one has the ability to have the full desktop sites, which, yes, you could change in a drop down menu before on the smaller screen devices, but on a small screen, it's not really worth that full desktop experience. On the bigger screen, I can do a whole lot more. I can log in to my websites and not have an issue on it. I can log into Nextcloud and I can see everything in Nextcloud just fine. And so they are coming a long way. And the point of this is, I'm sort of going through 10 years here of tablet use. And yes, 10 years ago was a different time. But at some point, tablets are going to have to become more than a media consumption device. And I want to get work done. And it's still, to me, if I'm getting work done, if I'm going to pull up a Word document, or let's say open LibreOffice and type a document, I don't want to do it in my iPad still. It doesn't seem natural to me. If I'm audio editing or video editing, the iPad is not a good place to do that. Even though You can now connect an iPad to an external monitor with USB-C. You can, and I'm sure there was adapters to do this before. You can, you have the ability to plug in flash drives now on iPad, which you could do years ago on Android. And it's not that you couldn't on iPad, you just needed this certain adapter to be able to do it. But it all seems like more work than what it needs to be. I don't want to open Pages or Keynote on an iPad and work on a slideshow when I have a bigger laptop screen, or I have a laptop plugged into a monitor, or that type of thing. So there's a lot of things that seem unnatural when working on iPad, and I don't know how they're going to resolve that other than just forcing people to change to iPads or tablets rather than laptops. And then 10 years or 15 years or 20 years or whatever, when they stop selling the latest whatever laptop, people are going to have to make the switch. I know people who record podcasts on iPad. I know people who record audio on iPads. Just not a workflow that I'm interested in. And people who use GarageBand on iPad. It just seems a whole lot more work. If you're a photographer or graphics designer, things like Photoshop are now available on iPad, making it much more useful for graphics designers. So things are coming down the line that I see the change trying to happen. I'm still not convinced. I think tablets are great supplemental devices for businesses, for schools, for specific tasks. So my specific task with my band, it's educational purposes. It's using a couple of apps to help train musicians to be better at things like improvising or being able to access PDFs, or being able to actually read PDFs in concert. And so a very specific task. If you're a business person, you probably have an app that you use specifically for your business, but it's not an all-around catch-all device that I can just carry with me and say, forget everything else I use. It's just not happening. And I really wish that there was a more positive outlook on my opinion of it. But I see the steps going in a better direction, but it's still, when I'm at home and I'm just casually moving around the house, I find myself grabbing my laptop more than I grab the iPad. And the iPad that I use is now only specifically used for my music business. And I'd like to use it more. I'd like to get my money's worth out of it. So that's kind of where I'm at with my thoughts on tablets, and the sort of hope that I have that these will one day become a much more all-around use device than just media consumption, scrolling Facebook or whatever your social media of choice is. I really struggle with this, and tell me if you have if you're using a tablet and it's 100% your go-to device for everything. I'd love to see what you're doing. I'd love to hear what you're doing. And for some people, it probably is. If you're just somebody who wants to consume media a lot, then I'm sure it will work quite well. But if you're somebody like me who does a lot of different things, maybe there's something that I'm missing. Maybe you can fill me in. Send me an email, mrptechreviews@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. And you don't have to necessarily talk about this show topic. You can just email to say hello, and I'd be happy to hear from you. It's always great to have feedback from the audience. So that is going to do it for this week. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We will see you next time.